At first glance, it looks like a scene from some low-budget horror movie, or even more grotesque, a war crimes testimony from the Nazi era. 10 of Britain's National Health Service governing units have admitted to lumping together the remains of unborn and miscarried children with other hospital waste in incinerators over the last 2 years to generate power for heat.
When dispatches investigated what's happened around the country, we discovered some hospitals are cremating the remains of babies on a near industrial scale. One of them is Ipswich Hospital. At this crematorium, it's cremated at least 100 remains together on 5 occasions in 2 years. But it also incinerates fetal remains in this waste-to-energy plant on the hospital site. Those remains don't come from Ipswich, they come from another hospital.
Essentially, you're powering hospitals by burning babies. And this is in Ipswich.
Yeah, well, that's clearly completely unacceptable to me. I will take that up with the chief executive.
I want to emphasise, by the way, that's Channel 4 TV, fairly left-wing rather than conservative. And Amanda Holden, who made that documentary, I mean, she's not known for her politics at all. So this is not some pro-life group. And if this was one hospital, or even a handful of hospitals, we could maybe conclude that it was a mistake, a terrible error. But these are 10 area authorities, which means dozens and dozens of individual hospitals. We now know that more than 15,000 aborted and miscarried babies in Britain were incinerated as, quote, clinical waste for heating purposes. They were listed under what was euphemistically known as the waste-to-energy policy. This has led to widespread shock in the UK, questions in Parliament, front-page stories in newspapers, all of which is entirely understandable. But just hold on one moment. Why the reaction? Look, we're told by advocates of abortion, we've been told for decades now, frankly, that abortion is not a moral or a human life issue because abortion involves the removal of unwanted tissue, and the only life involved is that of the mother.
This suction tip, which you can see moving violently back and forth on the bottom of the screen, is the lethal instrument which will ultimately tear apart and destroy the child. Once again, we see the child's mouth wide open in a silent scream in this particular freeze frame. This is the silent scream of a child threatened imminently with extinction.
That man was the, if you like, the Henry Morgenthaler of the United States before he changed his life. Wow, that excess tissue really has some feelings, doesn't it? But they say the fetus, they like to call it a fetus, is not a baby, it's not a life, not a person. But if it's not human, then what is wrong with incinerating it, especially for such a noble purpose as heating a hospital full of sick people? Now, I'm not trying to be provocative here, but I'm making a serious, genuine point. As I have long argued, if the unborn child is not a life, then abortion is always acceptable. If it is a life, then abortion is never acceptable. In the past couple of years, the issue of aborting babies because they are female has become prominent and disturbs many people. But again, these babies can only be male or female if they're human in the first place. If they're human, they have a right to live. They have a right to life, pure and simple. My claim, and it's not religious but scientific, is that at the point of conception, the unborn baby has a totally distinct DNA and genomic character, unlike any person who has ever lived in human history or will ever live in the future. It's quite something, isn't it? I believe that while no woman has to raise a child, no person has a right to kill a child. We abort because children are, female, disabled, not conceived at the right time, conceived in a poor country. Now, imagine, just for a moment, if they ever discovered a gay gene. Do you think babies with such a gene will be aborted? I do. So how does that make liberal and progressive-minded people feel? Of course, the burning of babies for fuel and heat is obscene and ghastly to a point almost beyond comprehension. But it's also entirely consistent with the current view we have of the integrity of human life. It's not about religion. It's not about fanatics with gruesome signs. It's not about that. It's about the most vulnerable people we have being given the most basic protection. It's about human rights, really, if you think about it. If you think about it.